Developing news back here in Washington, because in just the last hour, we've been looking at this vote in which lawmakers in the Senate were trying to pass a bill that would require the president to get the green light from Congress before more strikes against Iran. That bill has now failed, and that vote is closed. That's a done deal. Julie Sturkin is on the Hill. Walk us through what happened.
Yeah, Hallie, as we talked about last hour, this was pretty pre-baked. I say that because we knew that only one Democrat, Senator John Fetterman, was prepared to vote with Republicans against the War Powers Resolution, and only one Republican, Senator Rand Paul, voted with Democrats for it. Now, what this War Powers Resolution does, as we talked about, is essentially if it passed, and if it passed in the House, and if there was a veto-proof majority, it would restrain the president's future military action in Iran. But
hi, everyone. Adam is here. So what just happening right now? The real threat to Trump isn't impeachment drama or court battles, it's Senate math. The numbers are quietly shifting against him, and when they tip, his ability to govern by executive decree disappears with no rhetorical escape route. We are talking about the specific documented vote counts that are building toward a 60-senator blockade.
The U.S. Senate on Wednesday voted to block a bipartisan resolution that would have limited President Donald Trump's military campaign against Iran. The measure fell 53 to 47, with all but one Republican voting against it, and all but one Democrat voting in favor. It had called for Congress to sign off on any hostilities with Iran, a move supporters described as reclaiming the body's constitutional authority to declare war. Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock argued for the measure.
The declaration of war is not a power that the President of the United States has. The Constitution makes it clear the declaration of war is the authority and the responsibility of Congress. Presidents of both parties, yes, they have engaged in military operations, but the declaration of war belongs to this body. Well, to me, this looks like a war.
A bipartisan coalition that is already forming on war powers, on tariffs, and on labor rights. And the numbers we have right now show that the only thing standing between Donald Trump's most aggressive unilateral moves and a complete legislative stranglehold is a handful of Republican defections. Not dozens, a handful. We're going to walk through exactly how close that coalition is.
Opponents, including Republican Senator James Risch, argued the president acted within his legal authority, saying the strikes were limited and necessary to protect U.S. forces.
45 of the last 47 presidents, which is all we've had, have ordered kinetic acts, just like President Trump has done, without going to Congress. This isn't new. The Constitution, Article 2, clearly gives the president not only the right, but indeed the duty, as does his oath, to protect the United States.
Why the 60-vote threshold is the most dangerous number in Washington for this White House, and which Republican senators are about to feel the heat that could flip this entire balance of power. Let's start with the hard evidence. On Iran, a bipartisan war powers resolution was brought forward to force the president to seek congressional approval before any further military action. The goal was simple: reassert Congress's constitutional authority over war-making.
The outcome wasn't a surprise. Republicans have a narrow control of both chambers and have blocked earlier attempts to curb Trump's war powers. Still, lawmakers pushing for the resolution say they won't give up, warning that a prolonged conflict with Iran could pull the U.S. into another forever war, similar to the long campaigns in Iraq and Afghanistan. A Reuters Ipsos poll this week shows only 1 in 4 Americans approve of the strikes, and about half believe Trump is too willing to use military force. The House is set to vote on its own version of the Iran War Powers Resolution on Thursday. But even if both chambers approve it, the measure would still need a 2/3 majority to overcome a likely veto from President Trump.
The vote came down 53 to 47, with Republicans largely holding the line. Only one Republican senator broke ranks. One. In a political environment where the president's own counterterrorism chief had resigned specifically to state that the military action was based on no imminent threat, where nearly 60% of the American public opposed the operation, and where gas prices were already beginning to climb as a direct consequence, only one Republican was willing to cross the aisle. That single defection tells you everything you need to know about how fragile the president's firewall is right now. On a vote with that much political gravity, with that much public opposition, the coalition that wanted to constrain the White House fell just 6 votes short of a simple majority. But here is where the math gets truly consequential. A simple majority isn't the real barrier. The real barrier is the filibuster. To pass binding legislation that would actually force the president to change course, not just a symbolic resolution, but a law that could override a veto, you need 60 votes. That means from that one Republican defection on Iran, the coalition needs 9 or 10 more to reach the threshold where they can impose real legal constraints. Now, let's look at tariffs, because this is where the coalition has already grown substantially. In a 2025 vote aimed at rebuking the president's global emergency tariffs, the result was a deadlocked 49-49 with 2 senators absent. On that vote, 3 Republicans, Murkowski, Collins, and Paul, joined every Democrat to reject the administration's emergency declaration. 3 defections. That brought the opposition coalition to roughly 52 senators when you account for the absent members. Observers at the time noted that with full attendance, the opponents would have likely hit or exceeded 51. But again, to actually change the law, to strip the president of that emergency tariff authority permanently, you need 60. That means the tariff coalition is sitting roughly 8 votes away from the most powerful legislative weapon the Senate can deploy. Think about what that means. On 2 separate fronts, war powers and tariffs, bipartisan coalitions are already operating within striking distance of a 60-vote supermajority. The Iran coalition is starting from 1 Republican defection and needs 9 or 10 more. The tariff coalition has 3 Republican defections and needs 6 or 7 more. And the political environment is only getting hotter. Let's talk about the political pressure building beneath these numbers, because this is where the story shifts from arithmetic to inevitability. The president's approval rating is sitting at 36%. That number is not just a talking point, it is the baseline calculation that every Republican senator in a competitive state is making right now. When a president is that unpopular, loyalty to the White House becomes an electoral liability, not an asset. For senators facing tough re-election campaigns, every vote to protect the president's unilateral authority is a vote they may have to answer for at home. Then, you layer in the specific policy opposition. On the Iran situation, 59% of the public opposes the military action. That is a supermajority of Americans saying they do not want this conflict. And that opposition is not theoretical. It is showing up in rising gas prices as tensions escalate in the Strait of Hormuz. It is showing up in the resignation of the president's own counterterrorism chief, who publicly broke with the administration over the very justification for the strikes. Every one of those developments is a pressure point on Republican senators who are watching their constituents feel the economic and human costs of a war that most of the country doesn't support. And then there is the Supreme Court. In a 6-3 ruling on the president's emergency tariff authority, the court's majority included 2 Trump nominees. Let that sink in. The president's own appointees joined the majority to demolish his argument that he could impose sweeping tariffs without congressional approval. That ruling is not just a legal defeat, it is political cover. For any Republican senator who has been hesitant to break with the White House on tariffs, the Supreme Court has now provided a ready-made answer. I am not opposing the president. I am upholding what the Constitution requires, as the Supreme Court has just affirmed. That framing changes the political calculus entirely. It turns a defection from an act of disloyalty into an act of constitutional fidelity. So where does that leave us? We have a tariff coalition with 3 Republican defectors, sitting 8 votes away from 60, with a Supreme Court ruling giving every wavering Republican a defensible reason to join. We have an Iran coalition with 1 Republican defector, sitting 12 votes away from 60, but with a sustained procedural strategy designed to force repeated votes that compound the political pressure with every news cycle. And we have a president whose approval rating is in the mid-30s, whose signature policies are opposed by majorities of the public, and whose own judicial appointees are handing down rulings that undermine his most aggressive claims of executive power. Now let's get into the mechanics, because understanding why 60 is the magic number is essential to understanding how cornered the White House really is. The Senate filibuster requires 60 votes to end debate on most legislation. That means any bill that would actually constrain the president, any law that would permanently restrict his emergency tariff authority, any statute that would impose binding war powers requirements, any piece of legislation that could override a veto, requires a coalition of 60 senators to pass. War powers resolutions are different. They are privileged measures that can pass with a simple majority. But they are largely symbolic. They express congressional disapproval without legally compelling executive action. The binding constraints, the ones that would actually change how the president can govern, require 60. That is why the current defection numbers are so significant. The bipartisan coalition is not just forming, it is forming in the policy areas where the political pain is most acute. On tariffs, 3 Republicans have already crossed over. On Iran, the first Republican has crossed, and the procedural strategy in place is designed to turn one into many, and the senators most likely to be the next defectors are identifiable. Those in competitive states, those with industries directly impacted by tariffs, those with significant military communities feeling the strain of an unpopular conflict. Their calculations are shifting with every news cycle, every gas price spike, every poll showing the president underwater in their home states. The Keynes strategy on Iran is particularly worth watching. The commitment to force repeated war powers votes again and again, month after month, is a deliberate mechanism designed to compound the political accountability. A single vote can be weathered. A single news cycle can be survived. But when senators are forced to register their position repeatedly, when they have to explain to their constituents over and over why they are backing an unpopular war while gas prices climb and the administration's own national security officials resign in protest, the political cost of loyalty begins to outweigh the benefits. The first vote produced 1 defection, the second vote could produce more. By the third or fourth, if the pressure continues to build, the math starts to look very different. And do not overlook the Fetterman variable. On the Iran war powers vote, a Democratic senator voted with the president. That is a reminder that these coalitions are not strictly partisan. The arithmetic can shift from unexpected directions when senators are under cross pressures from their specific state environments. A Democrat in a competitive state might calculate that opposing the president on a national security issue carries its own risks. Conversely, a Republican in a libertarian-leaning state like Kentucky might calculate that opposing the president on war powers is a political advantage. The point is that the 60-vote threshold does not require a clean partisan split. It requires a coalition that can pull from both sides of the aisle, and the current defection patterns show that coalition is already active. The tariff coalition is the most advanced. With 3 Republican defectors already on the record and a Supreme Court ruling providing judicial cover, this coalition is approximately 8 votes away from the 60-vote threshold. The political conditions driving additional defections are intensifying. Businesses in competitive states are feeling the economic impact, consumers are seeing prices rise, and senators who want to protect their constituents have a constitutional justification handed to them by the highest court in the land. The question is not whether the pressure exists. It is whether 6 or 7 more Republican senators decide that the political cost of standing with the White House has become too high. The Iran coalition is building through sustained procedural pressure. The first forced vote produced 1 Republican defection. The Keynes strategy ensures there will be more votes, each one a fresh opportunity for senators to recalculate. The resignation of the counterterrorism chief, the 59% public opposition, the rising gas prices, the ongoing Strait of Hormuz crisis, all of these are compounding factors that make the next vote more politically charged than the last. 12 Republican defections are needed to reach 60 on binding Iran legislation, but the trajectory is moving in that direction, not away from it. The filibuster mechanics make the 60-vote threshold the only number that matters for real accountability. Symbolic resolutions can pass with simple majorities, but they do not constrain executive action. Binding legislation, the kind that would permanently restrict emergency powers, impose statutory war requirements, or override a veto, requires a supermajority. That means the Senate's ability to actually check the president turns entirely on whether the bipartisan coalition can grow from its current size to 60. And right now, on multiple policy fronts, that coalition is within striking distance. The political conditions driving defections are intensifying, not easing. The president's approval rating is at 36%. The public opposes his Iran policy by 59%. The Supreme Court has undercut his tariff authority. His own national security officials are resigning in protest. For Republican senators in competitive states, the calculus of loyalty versus political survival is shifting with every headline. The question is not whether the pressure exists. It is how many senators will break before the midterm elections and whether that number reaches the critical threshold of 9 or 10 on any given issue. So here is the bottom line. Donald Trump is not yet cornered by a 60-vote supermajority in the most literal sense. That blockade does not exist today. But the bipartisan coalitions that would form that blockade are already built, they are already operating, and they are already within striking distance of the institutional majority that would allow them to impose the most binding legislative constraints available. The Tariff coalition has 3 Republican defectors and needs 6 or 7 more. The Iran coalition has 1 and needs 9 or 10 more. And the political conditions that historically produce those defections are building in real time. The president's most aggressive unilateral governance claims are being closed in on from multiple directions simultaneously. The Senate blocking coalition is not a hypothetical, it is a documented reality with specific vote counts, specific defection patterns, and a specific institutional path to 60. The next forced vote on Iran is coming. The Tariff coalition is watching to see which Republican senators will be the next to join. And the approval trajectory, the economic pressures, and the judicial rulings are all moving in the same direction. We are going to be watching every single development as it unfolds. The arithmetic is moving, the pressure is building, and the only question is how quickly the defection count reaches the threshold that would transform the Senate from a symbolic check into a binding constraint. Drop a comment below and tell me what you think. Does the bipartisan coalition reach 60 before the midterms? Or does partisan discipline hold the defection count below the threshold all the way to November? Hit that subscribe button right now so you don't miss the next update. I will see you in the next one.